Chapter 26. King Kaiser's Secret Swordsmanship Manual and an Upgrade to Administrator Privileges. There was so much to gain from a single quest, Zeke pondered as he looked at the location of Kaiser's ruins marked on the map. Although the barbarians were a concern, it wasn't a place he couldn't go at all if it was the secret swordsmanship of King Kaiser. It was worth the risk. When asked about the most famous hero before the dragon slayer Terrakin Draker, everyone would name King Kaiser first. However, he was more of a legend than a historical figure, with feats bordering on the mythical, so there were many opinions on whether he was a real person. There wasn't much known about the king, to the point that his existence was debated and no ruins related to him had ever been discovered. Therefore, the king's ruins were sure to be filled with artifacts of immense value, not just a secret swordsmanship manual. Zeke memorized the location of Kaiser's ruins and closed the map, looking at his remaining 730 points. He spent 50 points to unlock Level 2 Draconian skills. Draconian skill. Level 2 Dragon Scale Armor locked. Dragon Claws locked. 300 Karma points required to unlock skill Level 3. Zeke read the descriptions of the unlocked Draconian skills. Introduction to Draconian Skill Level 2 Dragon Scale Armor. Dragon scales sprout on the skin, hardening it. Excellent effect against magic resistance. 80 points required to unlock Dragon Claws. Summons powerful Dragon Claws to strike down enemies in a single blow. 80 points required to unlock following Level 1. Level 2 skills also had many useful abilities. Zeke decided to unlock Dragon Scale Armor and Dragon Claws first, as they were necessary for combat. Draconian skills Level 2 unlocked. Dragon Eyes Expert, Dragon's Majesty Expert, Gluttony Beginner, Dragon Speech locked. Dragon Scale Armor Beginner, Dragon Claws Beginner. Dragon Speech, obtained by absorbing Bahamut's heart, was still locked. It seemed he would be able to use it once his Draconian skill level increased further. Zeke purchased 120 points worth of necessary enhancement potions and decided to keep the remaining 400 points for now. He planned to use them as unlock points if the system functions were upgraded. Zeke immediately started training, using the unlocked Dragon Scale Armor and Dragon Claws skills to master them for use in combat. In this way, he was growing into a master unmatched by any of his peers. We will now begin the Aura Practical Evaluation. All the members of the special class gathered at the central training ground. The instructor in charge shouted to the special class cadets once again, "As you know, the most important part of the semester evaluation is the Aura Practical Evaluation. If you don't get properly evaluated, you won't be promoted, so do your best." The cadets tensed up at the instructor's stern words. The exam was conducted by having the students called one by the instructor to take the practical evaluation to determine the degree of aura awakening. They first underwent a physical activation evaluation, and then they had to measure how long they could maintain aura imbued in their swords. The first cadet followed the instructor's instructions and underwent various tests, such as a vertical jump and a long jump to test agility, and various strength measurement tests. The instructor recorded the cadet's results with a sharp eye. "Take your sword and focus your aura." The cadet, breathing heavily, took his sword and drew up as much aura as possible from his ether hall. Brrr. The sword shook a little, then soon lost its strength and went limp. The instructor recorded the duration of the aura. Watching the other cadets being evaluated, Zeke recalled old memories, perhaps because it's a special class. It's definitely different from the regular class. When he was in the regular class, not many cadets had opened their ether hall, so it was rare to see them properly focus aura into their swords. However, all the special class cadets, even if they couldn't maintain it for long, showed that they had opened their ether hall and could focus aura into their swords. The difference in level was already starting to widen here. Even among the special class cadets, who were all talented, there were differences in ability. The cadets who couldn't properly draw out their aura due to nervousness received low scores and turned pale as if the world had ended. Next, Owen Siemens. Owen Siemens stepped forward from among the other cadets. As the second son of the influential Siemens clan appeared, everyone quietly focused their attention. Owen Siemens clad his entire body in aura. Whoosh. With fluid, natural movements, he leaped into the air. His records for the long jump and strength measurement were also much higher than any previous records. Phew. Owen looked at his records with a satisfied expression. The Siemens clan was particularly skilled in aura control even among the influential families of the Draker. It was the Siemens clan that created the aura training curriculum for the Academy's senior students. As such, all members of the Siemens bloodline had a talent for delicate aura control. Owen took his sword and focused his aura. Soon, the sword, infused with aura, trembled. Owen concentrated his aura into the sword for a noticeably Longer time than the other cadets, then, at some point, his sword began to vibrate differently than before, Wong. As a clear sword cry rang out, the surrounding cadets were awestruck. Oh my, it's already at the stage where the sword cries. That's right before the Purple Knight stage. The instructors were just as surprised. This level of aura control, which would be considered genius level even for an adult in a typical clan, was displayed by a 13-year-old, Owen Siemens, with a satisfied expression, returned to his seat. Perhaps due to Owen's surprising level, the other cadets were intimidated and couldn't properly demonstrate their skills. After a few more took the test, it was Raina Draker's turn. Raina said to the instructor, "Can I be evaluated with the Dragon Slayer technique?" The instructor replied in a slightly flustered voice, "That's the evaluation standard for senior students. If you can't perform it properly, you might get a bad score." "I don't mind." The instructor in charge pondered for a moment, then nodded. With the instructor's permission, Raina took her sword and raised her aura, Wong. As soon as she started, her sword let out a cry, "Huh." The instructor in charge, watching Raina, let out an exclamation without realizing it. He couldn't believe how naturally she handled the aura at that age. Soon, Raina held her sword and performed the Dragon Slayer technique forms, whoosh. Not only her sword, but her entire body was appropriately imbued with aura as she moved. The instructor's jaw dropped at the sight of her movements, cleaner and more precise than even senior students. It wasn't just using aura to jump or increase strength, but a level where she could apply it to swordsmanship, whoosh. Raina finished all the basic forms of the Dragon Slayer technique. Her movements were perfect, like a textbook example of the forms. The instructor in charge clapped his hands without realizing it. Unbelievable. Even among the senior students, few could perform the basic Dragon Slayer technique forms so perfectly. Raina caught her breath and returned to her seat. The other cadets looked at her as if she were an unreachable being. Only one person, Owen Siemens, gritted his teeth and glared at Raina. Damn it. He had thought that he would be ahead of Raina, a pureblood awakener, in terms of aura control, but the result only confirmed the difference in their skills. Owen glared at the gloves on Raina's hands. "If I were a pureblood awakener, I would be better than you." Raina, however, didn't care about Owen's gaze. There was only one person she cared about. Zeke Draker, come forward. At the instructor's call, Zeke slowly rose from his seat. He said to the instructor, "I also want to be evaluated with the Dragon Slayer technique forms." The instructor frowned at Zeke's words. "Do you think the semester evaluation is a joke? You didn't say that to Raina Draker." The instructor looked displeased at Zeke's words. He had let it slide for Raina, the daughter of the Turin clan, because she was known for being diligent and a genius. But Zeke had been consistently insincere, skipping aura practice classes as he pleased, so his request only seemed arrogant. The instructor said in an irritated voice, "If you can't perform it properly, you'll immediately fail, so be prepared." Zeke nodded and drew Bahamut from the scabbard hanging on his back. Bahamut was undoubtedly a legendary sword, but on the outside, it looked like a piece of junk. The other cadets sneered at Zeke holding Bahamut. "Ha. He thinks he can do it like Raina Draker just because he's a pureblood awakener too. Let's see if he can even perform the Dragon Slayer technique properly." Zeke ignored the voices around him. Phew. He slowly drew up his mana and infused it into Bahamut. Then he converted the mana into aura. TSSSS. As his aura was about to be revealed, Zeke quickly scattered his mana. "It's harder to hold back my power." Zeke immediately performed the Dragon Slayer technique. Whoosh. During his 2 years at the academy before his regression, the basic forms of the Dragon Slayer technique were all he had practiced. His body and hands moved before he could even think. Whoosh. He leaped into the air and slashed at the empty space with his sword. Because the movements were so familiar, Zeke simply moved his sword without thinking. He carefully performed the forms, holding back as he couldn't reveal his full power yet. After completing all the basic forms, he returned to his original position. He looked at the instructor in charge. The instructor was looking at Zeke with disbelief. Purple Knight? Zeke looked down at the spot where he had performed the forms. He had tried to hold back his power, but it seemed he had unconsciously released more aura. The floor of the training ground was cracked in the shape of the forms he had performed. "I tried to match Raina's level." "Oh well." Zeke smirked as he saw the cadets staring at him in awe, Owen with a dumbfounded expression and Raina burning with a sense of jealousy towards him. Unlike his previous life, it seemed he wouldn't have to struggle with the aura practical exam. The problem arose the next day. Headmaster Howard Draker suddenly summoned Zeke. Zeke, who didn't have good feelings towards Howard, went to the headmaster's office with a hardened expression. "Welcome, Zeke." Howard Draker greeted Zeke with a friendly smile. "Have a seat." Zeke, wary of the headmaster's excessive kindness, sat on the sofa. The headmaster even poured tea for Zeke and placed it in front of him. "Thank you." Although he wasn't grateful at all, Zeke gave his thanks superficially and left the tea untouched. Honestly, he wanted to throw the hot tea at Howard's smug face. Howard looked at Zeke and began, "I received a report about yesterday's practical evaluation. You achieved amazing results. I was just lucky." "No, not luck. Awakening the aura of a purple knight at the age of 13 is impossible with just luck." Despite the amicable atmosphere, Zeke saw the current Howard overlapping with the Howard who had expelled him from the academy before his regression. "It's a disgrace to have an unawakened person like you in this academy as of today. You are no longer an academy cadet. Leave all your belongings, including your cadet ID, and leave immediately." Headmaster, please give me one more chance. I will definitely awaken my aura next semester." In his past life, Zeke had begged Howard tearfully, but Howard had mercilessly expelled Zeke, and so Zeke had to wander the continent with nothing. Driven out from here, he had to live a life worse than death, erasing the name Draker. Zeke forcibly suppressed the murderous intent that surged within him. Just then, Howard brought up the main topic to Zeke. "So, Zeke, how about taking the grade skip exam?" Chapter 27. The grade skip exam, you say? Indeed, an outstanding cadet like you is certainly qualified to take the grade skip exam. I had given some thought to skipping grades. In my previous life, Raina had skipped grades and graduated early from the 6-year academy program in just 4 years. Howard stroked his magnificent Kaiser beard as he looked at Zeke. "There's no need to overthink it. I'm sure you're more than capable." "I'll do it," Zeke answered before Howard could even finish his sentence. His eyes were burning with fierce determination. "I welcome any opportunity to graduate from the academy early." Howard gave a satisfied smile at Zeke's answer. "Excellent, very well. Then I'll have the grade skip exam prepared. Be sure to show us some impressive results." Zeke nodded and left the headmaster's office. Howard, left alone, opened a drawer and took something out of a secretly hidden safe. It was a communication crystal ball connected to a secure line. He turned the dial and contacted someone. Bzzzt static noise erupted from the crystal ball, which only displayed a black screen. Then, a light indicating that the connection was established came on. Howard spoke into the receiver in a clandestine voice. "Both pureblood awakeners have agreed to take the exam." Someone on the other end of the receiver gave Howard instructions. He listened quietly to the instructions and nodded. "Understood. I'll make those arrangements." As soon as Howard finished speaking, the light in the crystal ball went out. Howard put the communication crystal ball back in the safe. He stood up and, stroking his Kaiser beard, looked at his reflection in the window. Things are getting interesting. 3 days after the meeting with the headmaster, Zeke received notification about the grade skip exam, and without even knowing what the exam entailed, he had to head to the senior cadet aura training room for the evaluation. When he went inside, Raina Draker was already there. She showed a burning fighting spirit towards Zeke. After the aura evaluation test, Raina's sense of rivalry towards Zeke had grown even stronger. Zeke tried his best to avoid Raina's gaze. "This is tiring." Originally, Raina was talented enough to be recorded as one of the greatest geniuses in the Academy's history. However, because she was placed on the same level as Zeke, who should be treated as an exception, it felt like her abilities were being downplayed. Yet, Raina herself, rather than being bothered by this, seemed to be burning with fighting spirit, considering Zeke as her rival. As the subtle war of nerves continued between Raina and Zeke, someone entered the training ground. Thump. It was the instructor in charge and a knight wearing Draker's uniform. Zeke was momentarily surprised when he saw the knight behind the instructor. Willow Sword, Ale Draker. He was one of the few people from the Draker clan that Zeke had a connection with before his regression. A giant physique with a sturdy-looking body, and a large scar across his face. Just by the aura he exuded, it was clear that he wasn't someone who would be called in for a grade exam evaluation at the academy. The instructor in charge stepped forward and explained, "Zeke Draker, Raina Draker, today, your grade exam evaluation will be conducted by Sir Ale Draker, a senior knight from the main clan." Raina and Zeke bowed their heads to Ale in greeting. Ale simply stared at them silently without saying a word. The instructor in charge continued his explanation. "The exam will consist of a spar. Show us everything you've got for 10 minutes. Understood?" Raina replied loudly, and Zeke simply nodded. The instructor in charge asked Ale. "Shall we begin right away?" Ale nodded at the instructor's words. He pointed to Reyna first. Reyna drew her sword and stood before Ale. Phew! The basic requirement for a senior knight of the Draker clan was to be at least a blue knight. The blue knight rank was just the minimum standard. Each of them was a true expert with over 10 years of experience in actual combat missions. They could be considered the pillars that actually supported the Draker clan. As Reyna took her stance, Ale also drew his sword. However, Ale's sword wasn't a typical arming sword, but a unique type. Zeke fell into thought as he saw Ale's sword. They used the Huandao curved sword of the Eastern Empire even back then. A strange weapon with a blade only on one side, and it was longer than a typical sword with Ale's tall stature and large build. The fact that he was wielding such a large sword made him quite intimidating. However, Reyna, known as one of the most talented among the Drakers, quickly shook off the intimidation and found her pace. She was the first to strike at Ale. Whoosh! A clean thrust aimed at Ale's thigh flew towards him. Seeing Reyna's sword flying towards him, Ale took a step back. Whiff! Reyna's sword pierced the air. She immediately changed her stance and attacked Ale with the Dragon Slayer technique. However, Ale didn't swing his sword. He simply moved his body and stepped back, dodging Reyna's sword. Whoosh! 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 Reyna showed incredible movements for a first-year academy cadet, but she clearly had her limits. Ale dodged Reyna's attack and turned his body, slipping into her blind spot and placing his foot between her legs. Thud! Ugh! With just that, Reyna lost her balance and fell. She quickly got back up and grabbed her sword. Huff! Huff! Because she had been attacking while trying to overcome Ale's intimidation. Her stamina quickly depleted, and she was already out of breath. And at that moment, Ale raised his sword for the first time. Thump! Ale stepped forward and swung his sword. Reyna quickly raised her sword to block Ale's sword. Crack! Reyna, struck by the sword, was literally flung back, crashing into the wall of the training ground. Crash! The impact was so great that the wall of the training ground even cracked slightly. Ugh! Reyna tried to get up, but her body wouldn't listen. She could only tremble. A moment later, she lost consciousness. The healers who were on standby quickly placed Reyna on a stretcher and transported her to the infirmary. That's brutal. An unfeeling man like a stone statue, with no mercy. He was exactly as Zeke remembered Willow Sword Draker. Ale returned to his original position and pointed at Zeke. Zeke drew Bahamut and said to Ale, "Are there any specific evaluation criteria?" Even at Zeke's question, Ale didn't answer. He's really a difficult person to deal with. In Duke's case, it was easier to read his intentions. But Ale was like facing an ironclad tree. Ale was the same when Zeke encountered him in the Third Continental War in his previous life. A true knight, impossible to read, but upright to a fault in his previous life. Although Ale was his enemy, Zeke liked him because he wasn't like the other Drakers. He was a person too good to die in such a trivial war. Zeke gripped Bahamut, shaking off various emotions. He pointed his sword at Ale simultaneously. His figure disappeared. Whoosh! Zeke used the Gale Force's Phantom Step, leaving afterimages around Ale and surrounding him. Shoo! Zeke's sword aimed for Ale's openings. As with Reyna, Ale twisted his body and dodged Zeke's sword. Whoosh! Whoosh! Zeke increased the speed of his Phantom Step. The afterimages increased from 3 to 5 simultaneously. 5 swords aimed for Ale's vital points. Wong! Suddenly, Ale raised his sword and blocked Zeke's sword that was aiming for his back. Thud! Ale turned around and pushed Zeke's sword. Zeke deflected Ale's sword and dodged to the side. If he had been even a little late, he would have been flung back like Reyna. Ale's swordsmanship contained immense power in each seemingly simple movement. I can't let my guard down. Since he couldn't reveal his full strength, Zeke had to move while controlling his power as much as possible. However, if he showed himself to be too weak, he wouldn't pass the grade skip evaluation, so it was important to strike a balance. Zeke stepped back and caught his breath. Unlike with Reyna, Ale held his sword and took a ready stance. Then he took another step forward. Thump! The pressure was immense. Even though he had only taken a single step, Zeke couldn't help but smile as he faced a strong opponent after a long time. A confrontation with a strong opponent was like a gateway to a new path. Wong! Zeke's sword let out a cry. He used Phantom Step and performed the Dragon Slayer technique. Dragon Slayer Technique 3rd Form. First verse Half Moon / the Half Moon / Imbued with aura, flew towards Ale, thud. Ale tilted his sword sideways and blocked Zeke's Half Moon / Zeke used the rebound from being blocked by Ale's sword to rotate his body. Dragon Slayer Technique 4th Form. First verse Full Moon / Immediately. Zeke's sword drew a large full moon, gathering centrifugal force, and fell towards the top of Ale's head. Ale fixed his lower body and swung his sword upwards from below. Crash. A huge crash resounded as Zeke's full moon / clashed with Ale's upward swing. Zeke couldn't deflect the full impact of the upward swing and was pushed back. Phew. It's definitely tough while controlling my aura. That's when it happened. Ale spoke to Zeke. Zeke Draker. He pointed his sword at Zeke. Unleash your full strength. He had noticed that Zeke wasn't showing his full power. At the same time, Ale's body moved whoosh. Unlike before, he swung his sword with an aggressive stance. Wong. The sword flew towards Zeke from all directions. Clang. Zeke raised his sword and blocked the sword, but the attacks continued endlessly. The sword twisted at strange angles, aiming for openings and attacking from unexpected directions. Zeke gritted his teeth as he blocked Ale's sword. He was using this strange Eastern swordsmanship even back then. He remembered struggling against this swordsmanship when he fought Ale on the battlefield before his regression. When he thought it would strike from above, it would change trajectory and come from the side, and when it came from below, it would go back up. It was so unpredictable that it was difficult to defend against seeing Ale using his full swordsmanship. Zeke thought he would have to use a bit more of his skills to pass the grade skip exam. Wong. A strong vibration emanated from Zeke's body. Not his sword. Dragon Slayer Technique Application Gale Force Phantom Step. In an instant, Zeke's body accelerated to an invisible speed. Wong. It was one of the Gale Force's applications, a technique that strengthened muscles and joints by coating the entire body in aura, increasing elasticity. The accelerated Zeke dodged Ale's sword and slipped inside his guard. Zeke's sword shot up, aiming for Ale's vital point. That's when it happened. Thud. Ale quickly stepped back half a step, creating an opening and drawing his sword towards Zeke. Crash. Zeke, blocking the powerful sword with his own, was pushed back by the rebound and, like Reyna, flew towards the wall of the training ground. Rumble. The force was so strong that Zeke crashed through the wall. This meant the healers had to bustle about once more. Only then did Ale lower his sword and stare intently at Zeke as he was being transported to the infirmary. Just then, "You rascal! You've completely wrecked my disciple." Duke, appearing out of nowhere, landed in front of Ale. Ale immediately bowed his head towards Duke. "Greetings, Duke Draker. Ale, you're still as stiff as ever. I'm glad to see you in good health. I'm someone who spends all his time playing around, so I have to be healthy at least. But more importantly," Duke grinned and slung an arm around Ale's shoulder. "So, how is he my disciple?" Ale kept his mouth shut for a moment, then slowly said, "Disqualified." Duke was startled at his words. "What? You're saying he's disqualified?" Ale shook his head. "No, I am disqualified as an evaluator." Chapter 28. Zeke Draker is beyond my capacity to evaluate, Duke said with a surprised expression. "Huh, is he really that good?" Ale said with a serious expression. "My personal opinion is that he should be sent to Valhalla tomorrow." A man even more stoic than a statue. Hearing the evaluation from Ale Drake, Duke had a bewildered expression. The instructor in charge, standing behind them, was equally perplexed. Do you really want me to relay that?" After gathering the opinions of the headmaster and various department heads, it was decided that Zeke would skip to the 5th grade. He had skipped 4 grades at once. Zeke simply nodded quietly when Duke told him the result. "You don't seem happy even though you skipped grades." "I'm happy." In truth, Zeke's mind was filled with mixed emotions. It felt strange to go from being the trash of the academy to being talked about as a historic genius at this rate. It was possible to graduate from the academy at the age of 15. In my previous life, I was expelled from the academy at the age of 15. The world is truly unpredictable. Since things had turned out this way, he decided to graduate from the academy as soon as possible. Reina skipped 2 grades, and Liam, who showed excellent results in the semester evaluation, was promoted from the regular class to the special class. Zeke, who had moved up to the 5th grade, lived a relatively quiet life at the academy, and during that time he was able to learn the secret techniques containing the secrets of the Gale Force. With nothing more to teach Zeke, Duke spent his time casually looking after Andre's sword. He maintained a continuous relationship with Professor Paynun, who had made the magic forge for him, but they became physically distant when Paynun moved to the Delphoa Royal Magic Research Institute and left the academy. He left Zeke a direct line, telling him to visit Delphoa sometime. Surprisingly, Ale Draker visited once a quarter to spar with Zeke and then left. Under Duke Draker's supervision, Zeke had to face Ale after facing Zeke for 2 years. Ale seemed to have realized something and applied for a leave of absence from the Four Seasons Castle, confining himself in a closed training ground. After spending 2 years like this with various events, Zeke finally took the academy graduation exam. Zeke Drake P-Pass. Zeke set the record for the fastest passing time among all graduation exam takers in history. Zeke gave a wry smile as he looked at the academy graduation badge he received directly from the headmaster. I wanted this so badly before. He was finally able to erase the academy, which had long been a source of trauma, from his mind. With this feeling of relief, Zeke received another benefit along with his graduation. The headmaster personally wrote him a letter of recommendation for admission to Valhalla. It was a tremendous benefit, as there had never been a case of someone entering Valhalla at the age of 15. Zeke handed the letter of recommendation from Howard to Decker. I'm so proud of you, young master. Unlike his usual stiff expression, Decker's face was flushed as he received the letter of recommendation. It's nothing to be proud of, Zeke said with an indifferent expression. When does the Valhalla semester start? It starts in March. So there are about 3 months left. The graduation exam usually took about a month, but because Zeke finished it so quickly, he had some time left. After a moment of thought, he said to Decker, Decker, go to Atlas in advance and settle in. I have somewhere to go before the semester starts. Where are you going, young master? I'm thinking of going to a resort to rest for a bit. Then I'll make the preparations. Yes, it would be good to find a quiet place in Argos. Understood, young master. Just then, Liam came to the floor. Master, you called for me? Zeke handed Liam what he had prepared in advance. They were things Liam would need before graduating from the academy. Among them were cheat sheets for each semester's evaluations. Zeke had personally prepared them for Liam, who didn't receive family support. If you keep this up, you'll definitely be able to enter Valhalla. I have high hopes for you, Liam. I won't disappoint you, master. Good, and when you become a 4th year, you'll need a proper sword to use. I've spoken to Jelion, so go to him and ask him to make a sword that suits you. Liam looked at Zeke with a touched expression at his words. Don't look at me like that, it's burdensome. You can go now. Understood, master. Even as he prepared for graduation and dealt with academy matters, Zeke didn't neglect his personal training. Wong. A strong sword cry arose from Zeke's sword. Soon, his body disappeared, leaving only afterimages. Whirl. Zeke's body appeared everywhere in the training ground at incredibly high speed. The Gale Force, Duke's signature technique, was fully revealed through Zeke. A blue energy surged from Zeke's sword as he moved like the wind. Wong. A vivid aura blade formed on Zeke's sword. Zeke swung his sword. Dragon Slayer technique application. Gale Force wind slash. The sword of the Gale split the air. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Simultaneously, a message window appeared before Zeke's eyes. Proficiency in the special skill Gale Force increases. Phew. Zeke lowered his sword and opened his status window. Junior Administrator status window. Name: Zeke Draco. Class: Immortal. Unique title: Blessed by the Ancient Dragon, Heir of Terracan Draco. Authority: Dragon Domination. Constitution: Divine Body. System functions: Inventory 100 slots. Mini app. Beginner Questbook. Passive skills: Healing factor, unyielding mental defense, infinite stamina. Combat sense. Special skill: Gale Force A grade. Expert. Active skills: Precise stab. E rank. Expert. Continuous / D rank. Beginner critical strike. D rank. Proficient high speed movement. C rank. Beginner mana reflection. A rank. Beginner area of effect buff. Beginner draconian skills level 2 unlocked. Dragon Eyes. Expert. Dragon's Majesty. Expert. Gluttony. Beginner. Dragon Speech locked. Dragon Scale. Armor. Expert. Dragon Claws. Expert. Current Karma points 365. The Gale Force, which had remained at the beginner level, finally became expert level. Zeke held his sword and skillfully created an aura blade. Have I finally broken through the barrier of a blue knight? Unlike in his previous life, he was paving a new path through systematic methods instead of the side effect heavy soul perception, so he hadn't yet found the way to become a Red Knight. However, Zeke decided not to rush and to steadily take one step at a time. Excessively rapid growth could actually raise the wall to becoming a Black Knight. Indeed, in his previous life, Zeke had tried everything to overcome the wall of the Black Knight, but his methods as a vagabond had clear limits. There's no need to rush. During the past 2 years, he had brought most of his skills to the expert level, widening the range of techniques he could use compared to before his regression. Furthermore, the secret swordsmanship of Kaiser in the Giant Mountains and Terrakin Draker's security vault in Valhalla were sure to open the way for him to advance beyond the Red Knight and become a Black Knight. He picked up a hammer again and swung his sword. His desire to become stronger filled the training ground. Argos was a kingdom located at the northern end of the central continent, closest to the northern continent. The reason Argos, which didn't have any particular strategic resources, was included among the 4 major kingdoms of the central continent, like Thebes, Delphoa, and Alencia, was due to its thriving dungeon-related industry, from convenient facilities for adventurers gathering for dungeon exploration to various equipment and manpower required for party formation. Everything needed for dungeon exploration could be found here. In particular, the Argos Adventurers Guild had a long tradition, boasting a 1,000-year history. Although the Adventurers Guild had branches all over the continent, its headquarters was located in Argos. And since all adventurers were required to register at the Argos Guild headquarters, aspiring adventurers from all over the continent flocked to this place. Next, number 547. The staff member in charge of registration at the Argos Adventurers Guild called the next registrant in a businesslike tone. The registrant who brought the documents looked quite young. At most, he appeared to be barely 20 years old. The young man with brown hair and green eyes handed the documents to the staff member. Zeke Murray, is that correct? Zeke, who had dyed his hair and changed his eye color with lenses, nodded. He had submitted his registration to the Adventurers Guild using the pseudonym he used in his previous life. The staff member, after reviewing the documents and confirming there were no issues, stamped them. Take this and they'll give you your registration card. Next, number 548. Zeke took the stamped documents and received his guild membership registration card. There wouldn't be any problems since he had entrusted the forgery of his identity to a reliable source he frequently used in his previous life. Thus, Zeke told Decker that he was going on vacation to Argos and then secretly slipped away to create a separate adventurer ID. It was all for the purpose of finding King Kaiser's ruins. With the ID in hand, Zeke immediately sought out a regular carriage heading to the base camp in the Giant Mountains. The Giant Mountains were a place where countless dungeons were hidden. Among the ancient artifacts discovered there, some were rare items valuable enough to allow one to live comfortably for the rest of their life. As a result, thousands of adventurers came seeking such a jackpot. Zeke, now one of them, had to go to the barbarian territory located deep within the Giant Mountains. Even for Zeke, who had the mini-app, going into the rugged Giant Mountains without any preparation was practically suicide. The Giant Mountains were divided into hundreds of sections, and there were carriages that regularly traveled through them. Therefore, it was much more efficient to move to the base camp closest to the barbarian territory and search for Kaiser's ruins from there. For this reason, Zeke looked for a separate carriage. But it wasn't easy to find one as it was peak season for dungeon exploration. In the end, Zeke managed to secure a seat on a carriage shared with others, stayed overnight at an inn, and boarded the regular carriage departing at dawn. Looking at the people on the carriage with him, there were some who looked like adventurers, but most seemed to be merchants. They were people who wanted to purchase monster materials from the base camp or sell consumables needed by adventurers, as Zeke was. Observing the passengers, he spotted a young porter among the adventurers and merchants and fixed his gaze on him. He was lost in thought for a moment after being expelled from the academy and wandering with nowhere to go. Zeke had seen an advertisement for a porter at an Argos dungeon and impulsively boarded a carriage heading there. He went there believing the promise of food and lodging in exchange for working as a porter, but when he got there, the treatment was abysmal. Contrary to what was promised, he had to sleep curled up in a warehouse-like dorm, and he barely got one meal a day. Half of the money he earned working as a porter was taken by the boss as a commission, and after deducting food and lodging expenses from the remaining half, there was very little left. The boss even forcibly took that remaining money, claiming to save it for him. Zeke gritted his teeth as he thought about that time. Even in his previous life, the first thing he did after gaining strength was to Find the boss, torture him Southern style, and then kill him. So his resentment towards the man spoke for itself. It was around the time the carriage was almost reaching the base camp, one of the adventurers sitting across from him, a man with a sword, casually spoke to Zeke, "Are you an adventurer too?" Zeke didn't answer and remained silent. The man leaned forward and said, "You should answer when someone speaks to you. You look like you're going to a dungeon for the first time." Then the man slid closer to Zeke. "Speaking of which, how about joining our party for your first dungeon? I'm telling you this for your own good. Dungeons these days are dangerous, so if you just go in unprepared, you'll easily become monster food." Zeke was annoyed by the loudmouth chattering beside him despite being ignored. This guy was most likely the type to deceive naive novice adventurers and exploit them. They would use them as bait for monsters or sell them to human traffickers. Since many people who entered dungeons didn't return, they would make excuses about them being dead and sell them off, committing such crimes without batting an eye. As Zeke was inwardly annoyed, the loudmouth acted friendly and slung an arm around his shoulder. Then the man subtly showed him the badge attached to his collar. "See this? I'm a graduate of the famous Draco Academy. You know, the Draco clan? Have you heard the saying that the party you enter your first dungeon with determines half your adventure life?" When Zeke still didn't react, the man's tone became rough, as if he was losing his temper. "Ha, does this kid have his mouth glued shut? Why aren't you reacting? I'm a senior adventurer offering you a favor, you arrogant brat." Then Zeke opened his mouth. "Shut up for a second." The man's eyes wavered. "What? You little punk, how dare you?" The man glared at Zeke with a fierce expression. Just then, Zeke abruptly stood up. He stared in one direction. Then he said to the coachman driving the carriage, "There's a monster appearing 500 meters behind us on the left. Looks like a group of orcs." "Is this a monster zone?" The adventurer behind him scoffed and said, "Kid, monsters can't enter this zone. Don't get cocky just because you're excited about being an adventurer, and sit still." That's when it happened. Roar. The orc's war cry echoed from afar. Chapter 29. The merchants and the coachman were startled by the sudden orc war cry, and no way. How can there be orcs in a safe zone? The coachman frantically whipped the horses. "Hurry up. Faster." Roar. The orc's war cry rang out once more. Nay. The horses, startled by the cry, reared up in excitement. Crash. As the horses thrashed about, the carriage overturned. Zeke quickly jumped out of the carriage. Thud. The carriage completely toppled over, and the horses also felt their legs getting caught under the luggage. In this state, reaching the base camp was impossible. Orc cries could be heard from all directions. The adventurer who had been bragging in front of Zeke earlier was pale and trembling, holding his sword. "Draco Academy graduate, my foot." Zeke hid behind a tree and observed the situation. A moment later, something emerged from the forest. Roar. A group of orcs wielding large stone axes appeared and began attacking the people. Arg. Help me. An orc smashed a person's head with its stone axe. The adventurers with weapons tried to resist the orcs, but it was no use. Help me. The bragging adventurer's head was smashed by an orc's stone axe. The ground quickly became a sea of blood. Zeke, concealing his presence, watched the orcs collect the bodies and belongings of the dead. If he intervened, it would leave traces. So he calmly waited for the orcs to disappear. How did orcs get into the safe zone? Argos, with its developed dungeon industry, thoroughly protected the safe zones at the national level to protect the merchants coming and going. Something must have happened at the base camp. As the orcs passed, he concealed his presence, entered the forest path, and headed towards the base camp. The base camp he arrived at was indeed a gruesome sight, perhaps swept by monsters. The fences were all broken, and blood-stained luggage was scattered about. Zeke examined the corpses. Among them were soldiers dispatched by the kingdom of Argos. They should have been able to stop most monsters with this much force. Unable to understand this situation, Zeke examined the traces left at the base camp. His expression darkened as he checked the traces. This was because he found traces of humans, not monsters, at the attack site. Although it was disguised as a monster attack, this was clearly a disaster caused by humans. It was clear that the base camp had been attacked, and then monsters, attracted by the smell of blood, had entered and looted the bodies and supplies. It seemed that the orcs, having come down to the mountain path, had attacked the regular carriage. Zeke dusted off his hands and stood up. For now, the important thing is to find Kaiser's ruins. Zeke selected only the necessary supplies from the remaining materials in the messy base camp and immediately left. There was no point in staying here, it would only make him a suspect. He immediately turned on the mini-app and headed towards the barbarian territory. As he climbed higher, the terrain became more rugged, slowing his progress. After traveling deep into the mountains for about 2 days, Zeke discovered something. It's been a while since I've seen this. Hundreds of skulls hanging on tree branches, not only human skulls but also the skulls of various monsters were hung together. This was a sign marking the beginning of barbarian territory. Even monsters rarely entered the area where the sign was present, but Zeke didn't hesitate and entered the barbarian territory. Just then, something caught Zeke's senses. He felt a presence following him. At first, he thought it was barbarians, but then he shook his head. Barbarians never secretly chase intruders who enter their territory. If they saw them, they would immediately capture them and literally tear their limbs apart. Whoosh. Zeke leaped onto a tree and concealed himself. Then he took out a dagger from his pocket. As he completely erased his presence, the figures chasing him revealed themselves. There were 3 of them, and they weren't ordinary adventurers. They're professionally trained knights. However, their movements were stealthy for knights. They must have been selected from among knight trainees and taught pursuit and assassination techniques. There was only one place in Zeke's memory where such madness occurred: the Hounds. Why are the Imperials in Argos? The Hounds were a unit secretly organized by the Rom Emperor to collect ancient artifacts. In the previous life, these Hounds rose to become the main force of the Rom Empire, but for now, the Hounds were still veiled in secrecy and few knew of their existence. At that moment, Zeke realized that the Hounds were also responsible for the annihilation of the base camp. It didn't seem like a coincidence that the Hounds, who specialized in pursuing ancient artifacts, were near Kaiser's ruins. For Zeke, who had been promoted to a Blue Knight, the Hounds were easily dealt with. I need to interrogate them and extract information. Whoosh. The situation reversed, and now Zeke was chasing the Hounds. He erased his presence and followed the Hounds for a long time, observing their range of activity. The Hounds moved in groups of at least 12. Zeke, who had a deep connection with the Hounds in his previous life, knew a lot about them. He noticed that they were on perimeter security duty. At this level, the regular contact cycle would be quite long, so even if I kill them, it will take time for anyone to notice. Zeke patiently followed the Hounds, and finally, he was able to find the cave where they were stationed. He held his dagger and slowly approached the cave. Using his dragon eye skill, he could clearly see in the darkness. Just then, one of them came out of the cave. Whoosh. Zeke covered his mouth from behind, stabbed him in the lungs with his dagger, and then slit his carotid artery. The Hound collapsed without even screaming. Zeke moved the body to the side and searched his belongings, perhaps because of his status. There wasn't anything of note. Zeke stealthily entered the cave, checking the terrain with the mini-app. The Hounds had modified the inside of the cave to create a base. This brings back memories. During my cartel days, I practically lived in jungle camps like this. Zeke had once been active as a killer for the infamous McCain cartel, which ruled the southern continent. After being tricked by a dungeon guide and sold into slavery in the southern continent, he received killer training and was deployed on assassination missions. Though rusty, the skills he had learned at the cradle and the academy were ingrained in his body, allowing him to somehow survive the harsh assassination missions. The cartel, finding this intriguing, formally trained him and made him an assassin for the organization. Thanks to this, Zeke spent 5 years in the midst of power struggles between cartels in the southern continent. Compared to the brutal cartel bosses, the still inexperienced Hounds were easy targets. Zeke put on a mask to hide his face and stored Bahamut in his inventory. Fully prepared, he entered the cave. Whoosh. The dagger Zeke threw lodged itself in the neck of an unsuspecting Hound. He had already grasped the terrain and the locations of the Hounds with the mini-app. Zeke immediately charged deeper into the cave. 2 Hounds were on guard duty on the railing of a 2-story building built against the cave wall. He took out daggers from his inventory and swiftly threw them with both hands. Thud. The 2 Hounds, struck by Zeke's daggers, fell to the ground below. Hearing the unusual sound, the Hounds waiting inside rushed out. Zeke threw the daggers in his hands towards the Hounds running towards him. Clang. One of them raised his sword, imbuing it with aura, and deflected Zeke's daggers, and at that moment, a Hound lunged at Zeke from the side. Zeke lowered his stance and rolled on the ground. He took out a dagger and stabbed it into the Hound's foot, then immediately took out another dagger and cut his Achilles tendon. Arg. Zeke circled behind the Hound and snapped his neck. It was exactly the way Southern assassins dealt with knights. It's a Southerner. Block the escape route and keep your distance. Shoot crossbows from afar. Perhaps there were soldiers as well as knights. As soldiers with crossbows emerged from the building, Zeke ran forward at incredible speed. Whoosh. A rain of arrows poured towards Zeke, but as he moved in a zigzag pattern, they couldn't aim properly and missed completely. Before they knew it, Zeke was right in front of the crossbow-wielding soldiers. Slash. Zeke beheaded one of the soldiers with a dagger and snatched his crossbow. He skillfully handled the crossbow and shot bolts at the other soldiers. Thud. The soldiers, with bolts embedded in their chests, collapsed. While dealing with the soldiers with the crossbow and daggers, the hounds swarmed around Zeke. Zeke took a stance with daggers in both hands. Then, the one who seemed to be the leader stepped forward and said to Zeke, "What's a southerner doing here?" They seemed to have mistaken Zeke for a southern assassin. "Let's make things even more chaotic." He lowered his voice and spoke with a southern accent. "Did you think you could touch McCain's things and get away with it, you damn Imperials?" The leader of the hounds said in a flustered voice, "McCain's things? We haven't touched anything belonging to them. Take that up with your damn emperor after you die." Zeke suddenly kicked up a stone at his feet. Whoosh. The hard stone lodged itself precisely in the leader's left eye. Arg. Zeke, seizing the opportunity, lunged forward and slashed the hounds' necks with his daggers. Arg. There was nothing easier to handle than a knight charging in with excitement. Zeke picked up the sword of a dead knight and threw it at another knight charging towards him. The sword, imbued with the will of penetration, pierced through the knight's body and lodged itself in another knight behind him. Zeke swiftly annihilated the hounds, leaving only the leader who had spoken to Zeke earlier. "You uncivilized southern scum, how dare you?" Whoosh. Zeke dodged the leader's sword and swung his dagger, severing his arm. Ugh. Thud. Zeke's dagger pierced the leader's lungs. Just before he died, Zeke said to the leader, "Damn Imperials, Kaiser's ruins belong to our McCain cartel." The leader's eyes wavered at his words. What nonsense. The leader of the hounds died with a look of confusion on his face. Zeke realized from the leader's reaction that they weren't after Kaiser's legacy. Then why are these bastards here? Zeke went up to the second floor of the camp and investigated their traces, and he found a letter written in code delivered from their superiors. The code used by the Imperial Knights was incredibly complex and sophisticated, making it nearly impossible to decipher. However, Zeke knew how to decipher the Imperial code thanks to his battlefield experience in his previous life. He quickly scanned the letter and checked its contents. These bastards are blindly searching for ancient ruins on the Emperor's orders without even knowing what's here. It seemed that the Rom Emperor, obsessed with immortality, was searching every corner of the continent to collect ancient artifacts. The hounds were deployed to any place that might have ancient ruins. Zeke clicked his tongue after reading the letter. That emperor has really lost his mind. Now that he knew the hounds didn't know about Kaiser's ruins, there was no need to delay any longer. Zeke left traces behind and exited the cave. He turned on the mini-app again and was about to head towards the location of the ruins. That's when it happened. Whoosh. A chilling sound echoed from the sky. Zeke knew this sound all too well. It was the signal for the hound's inescapable net to activate. Chapter 30. Whoosh. Zeke ran deeper into the forest, avoiding the swarming hounds. Persistent bastards. Zeke had already experienced more than enough of how tenacious the hounds were in his previous life. He turned on the minimap and counted how many hounds were chasing him. A total of 36 hounds were on his tail. It was clear that the number of pursuing hounds would only increase with time. Just then, a new hound unit appeared in front of Zeke. They must have been specifically trained in assassination techniques, as their movements were similar to those of assassins from the desert regions. Whoosh. Zeke twisted his body in midair to avoid the attack and retreated thanks to his infinite stamina. He wasn't tired, but there was no way the hounds would back down now. Should I just kill them all? The problem was that if any trace of Zeke Draker was left behind, things could get complicated. He had to leave only enough traces to be identified as a hitman from the southern continent's cartel. Dozens of hounds surrounded Zeke, their eyes fixed on him with sharp gazes. He, too, glared at the hounds and held daggers in both hands. The knights at the front lunged at Zeke first. Zeke skillfully dodged the knight's sword, rolled on the ground, and aimed for his Achilles tendon. Whoosh. Perhaps experienced in fighting southern outlaws, the hounds jumped to avoid the attack. Zeke lowered his stance as much as possible, held his daggers, glared at the hounds and said, "Damn Imperials, even if I die here today, the McCain cartel will have their bloody revenge." Despite Zeke's words, the hounds remained silent. He had provoked them to get more information, but the hounds didn't take the bait. If he were a real McCain assassin, he would have taken poison and committed suicide or made a deal to hand over information. But Zeke made a different choice. He took something out of his pocket and quickly blew on it. Bo! A loud sound, unimaginable from such a small horn, echoed through the entire forest. The hounds were startled by the sudden noise and looked around cautiously, but nothing happened, and the one who appeared to be the deputy commander nodded, signaling to capture Zeke. Several hounds approached Zeke. Just then, Zeke threw something in front of them. Whoosh. It was 5 smoke bombs he had taken out from his inventory. Smoke billowed up, completely blocking their vision. Zeke concealed his presence and quickly escaped. The deputy commander, sensing this, shouted, "Catch him now!" But something happened that made that impossible. Crash! They appeared, pulling trees out of the ground, over 2 meters tall, with muscles covering their bodies like armor. Their bare skin, adorned with menacing tattoos, was clad in their unique attire made of monster hides. They were the barbarians, the true masters of the giant mountains. Heir! The barbarians' war cry shook the entire forest. The hounds were flustered by the sudden appearance of the barbarians. "Kill those savages!" The hounds charged at the barbarians who appeared from all directions. The knight who ran at the forefront tried to cut a barbarian clang. Ha! Surprisingly, the knight's sword couldn't pierce the muscles and bounced off. The barbarian warrior grabbed the knight's arms and legs and literally twisted and crushed them. Crack! The knight, unable to resist, had his limbs torn off and died. The deputy commander shouted in a panic, "Aura! Use aura! Swords without aura won't work against barbarians." The knights imbued their swords with aura and charged at the barbarians. The swords, concentrated with aura, were able to pierce the barbarians' thick muscles. But the problem came after that. Ugh! The barbarians, having defended their territory for a long time, had learned to fight against knights who used aura. They sacrificed flesh to gain an advantage. They used their strong muscles to grab the swords that pierced their bodies, preventing them from being pulled out, and then they struck the knights' heads with their powerful fists. Thud! The barbarians' fists, possessing unbelievable strength, were like maces wielded by trained knights everywhere. Barbarians grabbed the knights' swords, closed in, and smashed their heads, as the barbarians pushed the knights back in hand-to-hand combat. The hound unit commander soon ordered a retreat. Fall back. Fall back! But the barbarians were no less tenacious than the hounds. They didn't just watch the hounds flee, they began to chase them. The giant mountains were like their backyard. Like a raging storm, the barbarians chased the hounds with shouts. Zeke, watching from afar, slowly revealed himself. "It worked better than I thought." Zeke fiddled with the horn that had summoned the barbarians. In his previous life, he had fought against barbarians, but when monsters appeared that were too difficult to handle alone, he had also formed a united front with them, the Mohawken tribe. One of the tribes he met at that time had a very friendly relationship with Zeke. Zeke was able to learn how to make the horns used by barbarians and their signal system from the Mohawken tribe. The signals Zeke had sent with the horn earlier meant, "A foreign group has invaded the sacred motherland. They are here." Although they appeared to be simple savages on the outside, the barbarians were people who lived with their own culture within their traditions. It was only in the central continent, where only human nations existed, that they were dismissed and ostracized as uncivilized. If you mess with the barbarians, you're dead that day. Zeke turned back in the opposite direction from the hounds who were fleeing from the barbarians. He, too, wanted to avoid becoming a target of the barbarians' pursuit after putting some distance between them. Zeke turned on the mini-app and headed straight for Kaiser's ruins. Since it was located deep in the giant mountains, the terrain was rough, making the journey itself an ordeal. He occasionally entered caves to eat the food he had brought to satisfy his hunger. And when fatigue accumulated, he used gluttony to hunt and consume monsters to replenish his mental strength. After climbing the mountain for several days, he finally reached the entrance to the ruins. This cave seems to be the entrance. The entrance itself was hidden by giant trees, so if it weren't for the mini-app and the guidance function, it would have been impossible to find even after months of searching. Zeke cautiously entered the cave. The cave was no different from an ordinary dungeon. Zeke proceeded cautiously, following the path indicated by the mini-app. There were occasional forks in the road, but thanks to the guidance function, he was able to find his way without getting lost. He encountered monsters from time to time along the way, and they were all turned into Zeke's precious points. The journey was easier than expected. Soon, the cave ended, and the floor changed to a hard brick path. Underground structures in artificial caves, such as ruins, were usually constructed like this. Zeke approached the entrance to the ruins while checking the map, but at some point, Zeke tilted his head in confusion as he looked at the map. What's this? A red dot was blinking continuously in front of the entrance to the ruins. It was a completely different reaction than anything that had been displayed on the map so far. Zeke sensed that something ominous was present at the entrance. He immediately took out Bahamut and cautiously entered. It was then, as he turned a corner and arrived in front of Kaiser's ruins. Damn it, I thought things were going too smoothly. Growl. A giant hydra was sitting in front of the entrance to the ruins. Judging by the size of its body and its 9 heads, it seemed to be at least a few hundred years old. Just then, a message appeared before Zeke's eyes. A fallen dragon corrupted by tainted energy has been detected. Fallen dragon? He couldn't understand why the system was suddenly showing this message. Zeke shook his head and pondered as he watched the hydra guarding the area. How do I get past that thing? His goal was to find Kaiser's secret swordsmanship manual, so there was no need to go out of his way to fight the hydra. Zeke, recalling his experience in the Dragon Slayer's tomb, gave an order to the system. System, can you open that door? As Zeke asked, letters appeared. Accessing the control device as requested by the administrator. Access the administration system of King Kaiser's resting place. Entry permission granted. Opening the entrance simultaneously. The tightly closed door behind the hydra began to open. The hydra, which had been guarding the entrance, rose from its spot. Roar. The 9 heads roared and shook their bodies. The entire cave began to shake. Oh, damn it. Zeke quickly used the Gale Force while the hydra was roaring. Dragon Slayer technique application. Gale Force Phantom Step. Zeke's body floated into the air and flew towards the door like the wind. Roar. But the hydra wouldn't let the intruder enter the door so easily. One of the hydra's 9 heads descended towards Zeke and opened its massive jaws. Zeke gripped Bahamut and focused his aura. A blue aura blade surged. Zeke raised Bahamut, enveloped in the aura blade, and swung it towards the hydra. Dragon Slayer technique 7th form. First verse. Dragon head. Beheading. The Dragon Slayer technique originated from sword techniques created to slay dragons. The forms of the Dragon Slayer technique, characterized by large movements, weren't suitable for battles against humans, but they were perfect for fighting giant monsters. Crash. The massive aura blade sliced through the hydra's mouth. Roar. The hydra, its mouth cut, roared in pain. Blood gushed from the wound, splattering everywhere. The hydra's blood, with its strong acidic properties, corroded the hard stone floor. Whoosh. Zeke's flight step didn't stop and accelerated forward. Then, the hydra blocked the open door of the ruins with its body. Zeke pointed Bahamut at the hydra and raised his energy wong. A massive aura blade surged. The hydra's heads lunged at Zeke. The moment the hydra's heads got close, Zeke used the draconian skill Dragon's Majesty. Thud. The hydra, feeling the dragon's majesty, trembled in fear and retreated. Zeke didn't miss that opening. In that split second, he launched the aura blade surrounding his sword towards the hydra. Dragon Slayer technique 3rd form. 2nd verse. Half moon throw. Wong. A crescent-shaped aura blade shot out from Zeke's sword. Whoosh. The rotating crescent moon cut off 3 of the hydra's heads. Roar. Acidic blood gushed from the severed necks and poured down on Zeke. Sizzle. The acidic blood immediately burned Zeke's skin. If it were an ordinary person, their bones would have melted. But Zeke was different. His healing factor immediately healed him. Tisk. Zeke immediately jumped through the open doorway, and as soon as he entered, he shouted, "System, close the door." Closing the entrance as requested by the administrator. Rumble. The door to the ruins began to close again. Then, the hydra's head squeezed through the gap in the door. Roar. 3 heads forced their way through the door and lunged at Zeke. "Get out of here, you snake bastards." Zeke leaped into the air with Bahamut. The hydra's head spewed poisonous fumes towards Zeke, but Zeke, trusting his healing factor, charged through the poisonous fumes. An aura blade over 3 meters long formed on his sword. Dragon Slayer technique 1st form. 1st verse. Sky cleaving. Crash. The massive aura blade cleaved through the 3 heads stuck in the doorway, from top to bottom. Slice. The hydra's heads were split vertically. Zeke glared at the hydra, sword still in hand. It seemed like the creature wasn't dead yet, as its body outside the door was still writhing. Growl. A moment later, the other heads tried to force their way through the gap again. Persistent snake bastards. As he muttered and prepared to attack again, a message appeared before Zeke's eyes. You have instilled fear in the fallen dragon corrupted by tainted energy. Inherent authority. Dragon domination activates.